I was born in Miami, Florida, and grew up there. I went to Miami Central High School, and I met my wife there in typing school. I graduated in 1964. I had a job at Eastern Airlines, but I could never get promoted because every time I applied, at the top of the forms back in those days, they had your draft status. So if you put your draft status on there, they said, I'm not going to hire or promote you or move you up in the organization because it's a matter of time you're going to leave. So I talked to my fiance and I said, I'm going to be drafted. It's just a matter of time. So I think I'm going to enlist and sign up to be a helicopter pilot. So do you want to get married now so we could spend a few months together and enjoy marriage? I might not come back alive. So we got married in July and I went into the service in September. I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for basic training. We went to Fort Walters for flight school. Men that signed up had never flown, never been in a helicopter. They got airsick, they got dizzy. And so I had a little bit of flight training so I could navigate, knew how to talk to the FAA and radio contact. So that was a big plus. All I had to do is learn how to hover and fly that little helicopter. If you graduate and you survive all of that, then we were transferred or we were moved to Fort Rucker, Alabama. My wife finally was able to join me. I couldn't see her except on the weekends. But in the evening, we could go to meet in a library or somewhere where she could bring a meal. We could have a meal together before I had to go back to my barracks. And then sometimes the wife would be sitting there waiting for her husband, and he didn't show up because he died in a crash or was killed in training. So it was a pretty intense toll on the wives. And there was a heck of an impact on the family. We didn't always have the concern and knowledge about how the family was coping with this. Our parents, our wives, and our friends, because we were so intense on getting through that training. You're going to Vietnam and you're going to fly one of several helicopters. To me, a lot of the young gung-ho guys wanted to fly Cobras. And back then the Cobra was a gunship. And you could see them there shooting rockets and doing things. And then they had the Huey pilots, and then they also had medevac, which flew a Huey. So some of the veterans returning from Vietnam said I should fly a Chinook. I stayed after graduation for 13 more weeks, transitioning before I went to Vietnam. We left from California and flew to Vietnam. You land in Vietnam and you take your whatever baggage you have and you go sort of like a holding area. They flew me up in a Huey, dumped me out, and said, here's a place where you can stay. Get your flight suit on because tomorrow you're going to work. So you had like one night of rest and the next day you were flying. Back in those days, you flew by a map and a compass. The newer helicopters have GPS. You know about your cars, you just put in the address. That didn't happen in Vietnam. You had to read a map. And so that's where my Boy Scout, I was a Boy Scout Scoutmaster for many years. And so that training came into play. I could read a map and I had other guys that couldn't read a map. So navigating and finding your way into the jungle was a little difficult. And also fuel management. So you couldn't say, like today, you know where the gas stations, if you travel, you can say my car gets so many miles per gallon and I can stop for gas, whatever. But if you were flying a Chinook and you had what they call an external load, it would slow you down, okay, because of the wind resistance. So you didn't know what your mileage was going to be. So you had to watch that carefully to know where you're going to need gas. I became what they call an aircraft commander. I got my Chinook with a crew of 2 gunners, a crew chief, and a co-pilot. Our mission was water, ammo, combat assault, and then they would say, during that combat assault, maybe one of the Hueys got shot down or had a problem. So I would do what they call a recovery. I would hover over and pick up that cable and then sling load that shot down helicopter or aircraft back to a base where they could maybe fix it or take the parts off. I also delivered telephone poles, you name it, was underneath. Dental pods, I would fly a dentist with a dental pod out to a fire base, and he would do dental work all day. Moving material and ammunition and water and food, there was no roads. And it also allowed the military to establish these fire bases. So they find, there was 14,000-foot hills up in the north, mountains. So if you could get the high ground, then you had a better advantage of the people below you. So they would try and get the mountains, clear them off, and put artillery in a company or more of troops, and then they could launch from there. So the only way to get there is resupply it and support it is by helicopter. Everything that was in Vietnam was centered around helicopters. One of the things about Vietnam and the life-saving capabilities because we had helicopters. So if you were wounded in a jungle, if you had to be transported, you were not going to make it. But if you could get a helicopter there, you could be flown into a hospital. If we did a combat assault, we might have 30 helicopters, 3 Chinooks. You had gunships, and they had another little small helicopter called a Loach, which would fly around and look for people. I was shot down 3 times. The first time I was shot down, there was a village called My Lai Village. So I was doing some resupply and happened to fly over that village, and we took a lot of rounds that shot out my hydraulics. The other time I was on a combat assault with the Koreans. The third time they shot out my right engine and it caught on fire. So I had to land in a neighborhood that we didn't own. I supported the Tiger Division with the Korean Army. And they had a different mindset about war than the Americans did. We had a lot of rules to follow, and the Koreans were pretty ruthless. We loaded on 3 prisoners that the Koreans had, and the Koreans were in the back. And we were flying them back to our base, the Korean base. And our crew chief, all the way in the back, had a radio, and he could talk to us. And I remember he says, "Sir, they just threw one of them out." I could hear the intensity in the crew chief's voice, that it was pretty traumatic for him. Our government established perimeters to work in. So you weren't allowed to fly above the DMZ. You couldn't fly into Laos. You couldn't fly into Cambodia. Nixon came out and said we were allowed to go into Cambodia. For several days, that's all I did was sling load out weapons that I flew back that were captured. I was wounded. After that day, I was sling loading these out. They wanted news media to see this. I was walking in the back of the helicopter, and a rocket went over to my right, and I remember I put my left hand up. I got 26 stitches in this hand, 3 in my eye and 6 in my leg. I came back to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and I was an instructor pilot in Chinooks. So I would now instruct the pilots that were going to go to Vietnam. The war was winding down, and the military says we have a lot of helicopter pilots. We have people that we really don't need anymore. So I never planned on staying in the military as a career, even though looking back, once I survived Vietnam, the military was a very positive experience for me. Being an officer and a helicopter pilot was great duty, right? But they came along and said, "Hey, is there any warrant officers who would like to get out of the military?" And I was fortunate because I had a job. I worked for Eastern Airlines. And when you went into the military, the company said they would provide a job for you on your return. But I noticed I was a little different. So you came back, and Vietnam veterans, you didn't announce, have a parade. I never told anybody They had 3 shifts there, and I started on a second shift. So people would say, "Hey, I haven't seen you." I said, "I was on another shift." I didn't tell them I was gone in Vietnam because people were not friendly and hostile or not. So you didn't have that conversation. I went to Miami-Dade Junior College, got my 2-year degree, but I found during that time that I had some issues. Later on in life, I moved to Tallahassee and I had a severe anxiety attack that I had to go to the hospital. And all of a sudden, I learned that my kids moved out of the house, I had a job, and I could start thinking about all these memories. And I realized I had a disability. So I went to the VA and I was denied all my claims. That's what prompted me to volunteer to do what I've been doing for about 15 years. I'm a volunteer with the DAV, Disabled American Veterans, and I'm at the Tallahassee VA Clinic. It's a ministry to me to help veterans in need from World War II, Korea, the Gulf War, all the things that I do. And I think being a veteran, a combat veteran that has experienced some of the things that they've gone through, gives me a little more expertise to relate to them. We help what they call disability claims. We see veterans, we help them with burial benefits, applications. So a lot of the average veteran that we see is in their 70s, Vietnam veterans. So do they know how to use computers and scan and do all that? So that's where we come in to help them bridge that gap and get the benefits that they put on the uniform. And because they did that, they are eligible for those benefits. The military, to me, teaches you commitment, duty, those kind of mottos, if you will, but you also have to live them out. I have a daughter, but I work more with my sons to tell them about value and respect, and what it means to serve and honor the flag and say the Pledge of Allegiance, to take your hat off, to be respectful for seniors and veterans. I need to understand the foundation of how I got started and how I got here, what the meaning and the value is that to me personally and to my country, and the example I set to others, to young men especially, because they're watching to see, not all talk, you got to have action to follow it up. So I try and instill that entire lifestyle to what I do.